When a man and his wife move into an old house, everything seems normal, until he discovers something that shouldn't be there. Mysterious marks start appearing out of nowhere, deep scratches, as if something or someone has been dragging itself through the walls. And then a notebook, left in the basement, contains an enigmatic message. He is awake. What's happening in this house? Something is watching. Something is waiting. And what's really going on down there? When my wife and I bought this house, we knew it came with problems. It was one of those too good to pass up opportunities that realtors love to sell. Old, in need of renovation, but with great potential. Our plan was to start with the basement since the space was large and could be turned into something useful. But as soon as we started working, it became clear that something was off. The musty smell was stronger than it should have been, and one of the walls looked wrong. The wooden planks covering it were different from the rest of the structure, as if they had been placed there later, without much concern for finishing. Curiosity got the best of me. I grabbed a crowbar and started tearing off the old panels. My wife watched, arms crossed, wrinkling her nose at the dust rising in the air. As soon as the last plank fell, we came across something that shouldn't have been there, a hidden room. Small, cramped, with a stained mattress on the floor and children's toys scattered around, covered in a thick layer of dust. The air inside was different, dense, stagnant. It didn't feel like just a storage space. It felt like something someone had wanted to hide. My wife picked up one of the toys, a stuffed rabbit with black eyes and worn-out seams. "This is bizarre," she murmured. I was more focused on something else. There was a pile of old newspapers in one corner, and among them, a black-covered notebook, worn with time. I picked it up and started flipping through it. The pages were filled with hastily scribbled sentences, trembling letters that ranged from legible to chaotic. Someone had written this in desperation. Some parts talked about noises in the night, shadows moving where they shouldn't. But it was the last entry that sent a strange chill down my spine. "If you find this, don't let him know you're here." My wife read over my shoulder and let out a short, nervous laugh. "This is like something out of a horror movie," she joked, but her expression said otherwise. I wanted to say it was nonsense, that it was probably just an old diary from some imaginative child. But something about that sentence stuck in my mind. Don't let him know you're here. As if there was someone. As if they were still there. Even so, we decided to finish cleaning the space. We moved the mattress to a corner, stacked the toys, and left the notebook on a rusty shelf. The room seemed less threatening with the light on, but that bad feeling wouldn't go away. The musty smell seemed stronger inside, as if something was embedded in the walls. Deep down, I already knew I shouldn't have touched any of it, but it was too late. Later that night, we tried to act as if nothing had happened. We had dinner, watched a movie, talked about renovations. But no matter how much we tried to change the subject, the basement seemed to linger in our minds. My wife asked if we should lock the door leading down there. I laughed and said there was no reason to. But when it was time to sleep, I realized that, without thinking, I had locked the door myself. It was around 3 in the morning when I woke up to a strange noise. At first, I thought it was a dream, one of those indistinct sounds the brain creates between sleep and wakefulness. But when I opened my eyes, it was still there. A faint, rhythmic scratching coming from somewhere below us. The kind of sound a large rat might make, or perhaps a branch scraping against an exterior wall. Except we were on the second floor, and the only thing below us was the basement. I gave my wife a light nudge, but she mumbled something and didn't fully wake up. I stayed still, waiting for the noise to stop, but it didn't. It wasn't constant, but it didn't seem random either. Long scratches, short pauses, then more scratches, as if someone was testing something. No matter how much my instincts screamed at me to ignore it, I slowly got up and walked to the hallway. The silence of the house felt deeper as I went down the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. I stopped in front of the basement door, holding the doorknob for a moment before turning it. The wood gave way with a low creak, and the cold basement air rose, sending a shiver through me. The light flickered when I flipped the switch, blinking twice before stabilizing. I stepped down a few stairs, trying to listen for anything beyond my own pounding heartbeat. Nothing. Just that heavy, unsettling silence. I walked to the entrance of the hidden room, now empty, with only the toys in the corner and the rusty shelf holding the notebook. Everything looked normal, except for one detail. The notebook, which I had left on the shelf, was now on the floor, its pages open as if someone had touched it. Holding the notebook, I swallowed hard and forced myself to pick it up. That sentence hadn't been there before. The last page was still someone wrote with the same ominous diary. My mind raced, when I flipped to the previous trying to find a rational something made my stomach twist. Could my wife have before all the entries had chaotic? Did some previous owner still have access to the house? Now a new phrase had been added in a different script. I would have heard firmer, more careful, and more than already let him know. The basement had been locked tight ever since we went upstairs. My first instinct was to run upstairs and wake my wife, but deep down, I knew that wouldn't change anything. I would only scare her too, and maybe I was just tired and letting my mind run wild. I took a deep breath, put the notebook back in place, and closed the basement door. I locked it twice, trying to convince myself that this was enough to make me feel safe. But it wasn't. That night, I had trouble falling asleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt an odd discomfort, as if something was wrong with the air around me. The house was too silent, but at the same time, it felt like I wasn't alone. I tossed and turned in bed, listening to the wind outside, the occasional creaks of the old structure. Nothing unusual, at least until around 3 a.m., when the sound returned. The same slow, rhythmic scratching. But this time, it didn't seem to come from the basement. It was higher, closer. I held my breath and sat up in bed, my eyes adjusting to the darkness of the room. My wife was asleep beside me, breathing slowly. The sound continued, scraping against the wood. It wasn't a rat. It wasn't a branch. It was something deliberate. My eyes scanned the room, and that's when I noticed it. The door to our closet was ajar. I was absolutely sure we had closed it before going to bed. The scratching seemed to be coming from inside there. My heart raced. I wanted to get up and check. I wanted to turn on the light and end this once and for all. But my body refused to move. I could only stay there, listening to that faint and persistent sound. Then it stopped. For a few seconds, the silence was absolute. But before I could convince myself that I had imagined everything, something came out of the closet. I didn't see it. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't feel any breeze moving. But something had changed in the room. A presence. A terrible sense that I shouldn't be there. It was as if someone was standing next to the bed, staring directly at me, waiting for me to make a mistake. My body reacted on its own. I squeezed my eyes shut and pretended to sleep. I don't know how long I stayed like that, trying to control my breathing, waiting for any other sign of movement. But nothing happened. The room remained still. Only after a while, when the tension started to ease, did I have the courage to open my eyes. The room was empty. The closet was still ajar. And the only thing different was the basement door. It was open. I didn't go down to the basement that night. I just closed the door again, locked it, and went back to bed. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, but staying there in the dark, pretending nothing was happening, seemed like the only thing I could do. When the sun finally started to rise, I got up quietly and went down to the basement again. This time, I took a baseball bat with me. I had no idea what I was expecting to find down there. An intruder? Some animal? Something worse? I turned on the light and went down slowly, trying to ignore the constant chill running up my neck. The air felt even heavier than the night before, and that smell of mildew and old things now had something else, a metallic scent almost like rust. I approached the hidden room and looked inside. Nothing seemed to have changed. The mattress was still there, the toys piled in the corner, the notebook on the shelf. But then I noticed the scratches on the floor. They were long, irregular marks, deep scratches starting near the entrance and going to the middle of the room. As if something had been dragged inside. My heart raced. I knew I hadn't done that, and my wife certainly hadn't come down here alone. That's when I noticed something else. The notebook. It was open again, but this time on a different page. I approached, swallowing hard, and read the new message written there, in the same careful handwriting as the night before. Just 3 words. He's awake. I left the basement so fast I almost tripped on the stairs. My wife was already awake in the kitchen, and noticed my expression right away. "What's wrong?" she asked, concerned. I wanted to tell her everything, but the last thing I wanted to do was scare her even more. "Nothing, elite. I just thought I heard something downstairs, but it was just the wind." She didn't seem convinced, but she didn't push it. The day passed slowly. Every sound in the house seemed louder, stranger. Doors creaking, wood cracking, the fridge making normal noises. Everything made me tense. But nothing happened. I began to convince myself that maybe I was paranoid, that my mind was playing tricks on me because of the diary. But then, in the late afternoon, my wife called me from the living room. She was looking at the wall next to the basement door. "What's this?" she asked, pointing. I walked over and felt my stomach drop. There were scratch marks there, as if someone had run their nails across the wood, back and forth, in an irregular pattern. They weren't there in the morning. I would have noticed. My wife furrowed her brow and ran her hand over the marks. Is something living down there? She asked, half joking, but with a worried look. I wanted to say yes, that it was just an animal, but I knew it wasn't. That night, we locked the basement door with everything we had, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't help. The house was silent, the kind of heavy silence that feels more like a warning than a relief. We locked the basement door and piled a dresser against it. My wife thought it was excessive, but I insisted. She knew I was hiding something, but didn't ask. Maybe it was better that way. We tried to go on with the night as normal. We had dinner, watched TV, but the tension between us was palpable. Neither of us wanted to be the first to mention the basement. When it was time to sleep, my wife fell asleep quickly. I, on the other hand, stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. I was waiting for the sound, for proof that I wasn't losing my mind. And it came. It was different this time. The scratching wasn't a distant sound anymore. It didn't come from the basement. It came from the other side of our bedroom door. My body froze. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The sound was lighter than before, more calculated. As if it knew I was awake. As if it were waiting to see what I would do. The doorknob turned. My heart almost stopped. I wanted to scream, wake my wife, but my voice wouldn't come out. The doorknob turned again, slowly, then stopped. The silence returned. I could barely hear my own breath. I stayed there, motionless, waiting for it to go away. For a moment, I thought it had. Then something moved. I didn't see anything, didn't hear footsteps. But the feeling that we weren't alone was unbearable. The room seemed smaller, the air thicker. I didn't know what to do. I closed my eyes, tried to control my breathing, waited. And then, without warning, the doorknob turned violently. The door shook, as if something were trying to force it open. My wife woke up startled, and before she could ask anything, the noise stopped. The silence returned. But now somehow it was worse. We stayed awake until dawn. As soon as the sun came up, we went to the door of the room. On the wood outside, there were scratch marks, identical to those from the basement. We didn't say anything. We just started packing our things. We left the house that same day, leaving furniture behind, without looking back. We never returned. To this day, I don't know what it was. I don't know why it was hiding, or what would have happened if we had stayed longer. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I think I can still hear it. The scratching.